Welcome to the Evidence Hour, Facilitators of Help Seeking for Survivors of Intimate Partner Violence in the U.S. The Center for Victim Research is holding these Evidence Hour webinars to showcase systematic reviews and meta-analyses that examine an issue of importance to crime victim services and researchers and others interested in crime victim issues. It is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Kristen Ravi is an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee-Knoxville. Her research interests include children's exposure to parental intimate partner violence, IPV help seeking, IPV among immigrants and refugees, and survivors' experiences with transportation coercion. Sarah Leach is an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Memphis. Her research interests include help-seeking behaviors among survivors of intimate partner violence and the impact of the built environment on survivors' abilities to access services and receive positive outcomes from those services. Christina Ciccone is a case manager at the Johnson County Family Crisis Center. That center offers services to IPV survivors such as counseling, parenting classes, IPV education, and emergency shelter. And with that, I'm going to turn controls over to Kristen.
Thank you, Susan. Okay. Can I get confirmation that that is the PowerPoint slide? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Susan, for such a wonderful introduction. That was a very lovely introduction. I also will add that Christina recently was promoted and is now a children's therapist in her workplace, which is super exciting. And we also wanted to mention that Dr. Rachel Bothstrog, the assistant professor at the University of Texas at Arlington, also worked with us on co-authoring this systematic review. So we wanted to acknowledge her as well today. So in terms of learning objectives, today the purpose of this webinar is for audience members to understand the role of formal services in responding to intimate partner violence, or IPV, examine the current state of the literature surrounding facilitators of formal IPV help seeking, and exploring how to incorporate identified facilitators into IPV service approaches with implications for researchers and practitioners. So let's begin with some background about the impact of IPV and formal help seeking. As many of you know, IPV has widespread negative and physical health impacts. In 2015, 757 deaths and over 700,000 serious injuries were the result of IPV in the United States. Survivors of IPV are at an increased risk for physical problems, especially with their cardiovascular, gastrointestinal, reproductive, and neurological systems. And survivors of IPV often face mental health challenges such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as economic hardship due to difficulties being able to maintain economic independence, as well as missing up to 8 million workdays each year. And it's important that we talk about COVID-19 as it's exacerbating the impacts of IPV by increasing isolation and increasing economic problems. So when we refer to IPV formal services, what we're referring to are emergency shelters, and these are typically short-term shelters that are usually housing survivors for 30 to 90 days. Transitional housing, which tend to be longer term, and they're usually up to 6 months to 2 years, and they often will provide rental assistance to the survivor. We're also talking about counseling, advocacy, and when we talk about advocacy, we're talking about both the legal advocacy in that the legal advocates who assist with navigating the legal system for survivors who want to go through that system, as well as advocates who are helping survivors to get connected with other services that they may need. We're also talking about economic support and children's programs. In terms of the rate of help seeking, studies vary. based on the rate of help seeking, based on who is participating in the survey and how help seeking is measured. But here is a collection of prevalence rates based on several studies in the literature. And it's important to note that male survivors often seek help at much lower rates than female survivors. So I'll let you take a second to kind of look at those different percentages. And as you can see, law enforcement is one of the larger areas, as well as medical and mental health providers. So what we know so far about the benefits of support from IPV services is that they contribute to improved outcomes among survivors across domains of well-being. The benefits of support that are received from formal IPV services include reducing the impact of the violence, obtaining important information about the violence that they have experienced in terms of just some general education around IPV and how that affects them, and as well as feeling supported, improving their decision making, increasing self-efficacy and coping skills, as well as increasing well-being and decreasing PTSD symptoms, as well as reducing future IPV victimization. We do want to note that despite there's research that shows that there's benefits of engaging in the formal service systems, not all survivors have positive experiences when they do seek help, and they may experience system failures when they're attempting to seek help from providers, which can disrupt the help-seeking process for them and ultimately their long-term well-being and the abuse that they experience. So thinking about the research questions that we had for our systematic review, we sought to answer what are the key empirically identified facilitators to help seeking for adult IPV survivors in the US, and what populations and service sectors are represented in the research related to facilitators of help seeking. So to conduct our systematic review, we located academic articles from academic journals from electronic databases through our libraries, our academic libraries, electronic databases. We searched 10 electronic databases. We developed a list of key terms that helped us to locate these studies. Some of them included help seeking. We also used the terms facilitator or promotive. And studies were included if the studies were specific to the participants were survivors themselves rather than practitioners or other individuals. We were very careful to just have survivor voices included. Survivors who were over the age of 18, that the study addressed formal help seeking in the US, and that it was published after 2005. And so now I'll hand it over to Sarah and Christina to talk about our results.
Thank you, Kristen. So Christina and I are going to present the results of our systematic review. And so before we dive into the themes that we noted in the literature related to factors that facilitate help seeking, I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into the articles that were included in the systematic review. And so after our systematic search of the literature, 24 articles met the inclusion criteria to be included within our paper. And we first reviewed these articles to see where researchers recruited their participants, and then we wanted to note the demographics of the participants that were within the included articles as well. So participants were recruited from a variety of locations, including a diverse group of community-based agencies, such as legal offices, healthcare settings, and community organizations. And they were also recruited from agencies that were primarily focused on serving the needs of survivors of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So these were things like shelters and outreach agencies that were based in the community. And then finally, participants were recruited from university campuses as well as community college campuses. Thank you. In terms of the demographics of the articles that were, or the demographics of the participants from the included articles, 19 of the articles included samples that were only women, and then 5 had samples that included both male and female participants. And then looking at the overall ages of the participants within the 24 articles, their ages ranged from 15 to 85 years. So we have quite a diverse group of people experiencing IPV within these articles as far as age. The articles also were, the majority of them recruited from diverse populations. So majority of the articles focused on a particular population in order to understand that population's unique experiences with intimate partner violence. So this included recruiting samples that were members of the LGBTQIA community, members of the deaf community, as well as members of BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, multiracial persons of color, older adults, mothers, and college students. And so Christina and I are now going to present the findings from our review. And so the way this will work is I'm going to present the overall themes that we noted within the literature with regards to facilitators. And then Christina is going to give her perspective on how those findings can be used within the practice community and what implications those findings have for providers working with survivors based at agencies within the community. And so we had 5 main themes which related to facilitators for help seeking. And so the first theme that we noted was support. And so within the articles, the first theme identified both informal and formal support as a critical factor that contributed to survivors seeking help for their experiences of IPV. And so with regards to informal support, participants noted that having friends and family encouraged them to seek help and actually was the final push they needed in order to reach out to an agency or an organization to get help for their experiences with abuse. And in addition to friends and family, survivors also felt that encouragement from their children was critical in terms of them finally seeking help for their experiences of abuse. And one quote that we noted within an article was particularly poignant. It said, "They, the kids, say things to me to let me know that I did the right thing." So this participant is noting that her children provided her the encouragement that she needed to seek support, or the support and encouragement that she needed to seek help. So in addition to informal support, participants also found that seeking help through other formal sources, such as a therapist, a healthcare provider, or even university faculty, facilitated them seeking help from IPV service providers. So they described how being believed and validated by someone like a therapist or a doctor helped them finally jump and actually make the decision to get help. And so these support networks provided a listening ear, which really helped them validate and provided that open, safe space for them to seek help. And so they encouraged survivors to seek help and get help with regards to their safety, as well for themselves, as well as their families. And so Christina, how do you think agencies can utilize survivors' need for support, both from formal and informal networks, in order to seek help for participants?
So as a provider, I think it's really important that for both informal and formal services, or just, the big things of offering that empowerment and that validation to clients that come in that are seeking services. A big portion of the empowerment piece is, giving them the choice and the option as to who they really want to share their story with, whether it's a family or a friend, giving them that opportunity to tell a trusted person. And by giving them that choice, that also gives them somewhat of control back, something that they probably haven't had in a really long time since they've been so controlled by their partner. Another thing, like I said, is the validation and education part of it, making sure that you're really validating a client's experience and what is taking place within their lives. I know that it is very common when we're meeting with clients that are suffering from IPV is that they tend to really minimize their situation. A lot of times, they'll say, well, my partner's never actually physically touched me, they've only threatened, so it really is an abuse, right? Or, they've been called crazy or insane by a partner, so they kind of start to think that all of this is happening in their head and that all of this is because of them or that it's their fault. And that's why I think education, as well as with empowerment and validation, is so important, touching on, the cycle of violence and the power and control will, really brings to light what is taking place within the relationship, and showing them, these themes that are happening are not okay and they shouldn't be happening. And to touch on with children, a lot of children do know what's right from wrong. And so communicating with children, what a healthy relationship or, what love should look like is important in teaching them and communicating them throughout this process.
That's great. I love what you said about sharing their story, being able to choose who they share their story with. So I think that's something so critical that even the research community can benefit from researching further, is the importance of having people around you that you told your story to when you go tell others, and then how can they be a part of your journey as you seek help. Great. And so the next thing that we noted within our systematic review was related to provider knowledge. And so provider knowledge in terms of IPV, provider knowledge and the way that IPV manifests itself across different populations, such as IPV among same-sex couples, older adults, and then tactic used by abusers within those unique relationships, can really facilitate help seeking. And so studies within our review indicated that service providers who understand the nuances of IPV within these populations, they are then better able to assist survivors, and that contributed to survivors continuing to seek help. And so not only having a knowledge of the way that IPV manifests itself across different unique relationships, but also providers that have cultural humility when working with BIPOC and LGBTQIA populations, that also facilitated help seeking for participants within the articles. So specifically agencies and organizations which offered services that take into consideration and reflect on survivors' unique cultural identities, help survivors to then feel comfortable seeking help from additional organizations. And so providers who are knowledgeable about the experiences of IPV and who use gender inclusive language, who use culturally appropriate terms, they really assist survivors in feeling safe whenever they do seek help. And then finally, agencies that provided services that were tailored to meet the specific needs of specific groups of survivors also facilitated help seeking. And so this included articles that are agencies that offered language lines, offered services in other languages, offered captioning for members of the deaf community. Those having those services tailored to meet the unique needs of members of the community who fall in marginalized categories really facilitated help seeking. And so, Christina, how do you think the practice community can benefit from these findings?
I think a big thing is that as a provider is that you really have to take away what the gender roles that have been placed into society, and really having a great understanding that IPV doesn't just happen within a single population. It doesn't just take place between male, female, or vice versa, or one specific race, that it's happening, across the board. And so I think to add to that, a big thing is that despite what a person may identify as, is that they should still be treated with respect, and that their experience may be validated. A good experience of that is that, let's say a male client comes in and, he's very much ashamed that he's being verbally abused by maybe a male or female partner, because of that gender role and that stigma that as a male, you should always be in control, and, you should just suck it up and be a man. You really have to understand that it happens to males too. It's not just happening to women, it's happening to everybody, and they should still be treated with respect. And a lot of times, just to really add to that too, is that when males come in, I think, again, to add to the stigma, is that primarily is to really try and believe their story, and to kind of put that stigma aside and to give them the assistance that they're needing. Another part of that is, like you said, is that as well as, that we see a lot of people from different cultures, and trying to respect their culture and to meet them where they're at. a good example that's listed is, let's say you have a woman that comes in that's from a primarily male dominant culture, and she's never worked a day in her life, and she's always had to been forced to submit to her partner, and doesn't have a means of making a living for herself and her family. It's important that you meet them with that respect and find out what their comfortability is and what they're willing to do, and to try and respect their culture as well.
Yeah, I think the root of what you're saying is that experiences shouldn't be generalized, that everybody has a unique experience with intimate partner violence. And so trying to meet that person where they're at, just like you said, and understand their unique experiences is very important. I think that's one of the benefits, or one of the good takes away from our review, is that there were articles that focused specifically on individuals' unique experiences of IPV and trying to understand the different dynamics that take place within these relationships. And so the next theme that we found was related to accessibility. And so in addition to providers being competent and offering a variety of services, articles found that survivors need agency and organizations to be accessible in order to seek help. Participants discussed how technology could be used to help survivors access agencies and organizations, such as offering things like helplines or text line. And that made it easier for survivors to access services, especially for members who might be challenged with their mobility or might be challenged with a particular disability. So in addition, offering services in different languages also contributed to survivors being able to access resources. For instance, one survivor said, "I think more organizations or more people who help in Spanish. I say that for us, the language is often what stops us from moving forward." And so I think that's an important takeaway, that if survivors don't know that there's going to be services in their language, that's going to discourage them from moving forward and seeking help. And finally, participants in the included article suggested that services need to be located in places that are easy for them to access due to potential transportation challenges or just the inability to be able to get away from their abusive partner. So co-locating services with other service providers, such as having services available on college campuses or in health clinics, in places that survivors routinely go to, really could encourage survivors to seek help from agencies. So reducing those transportation barriers, those time barriers, as well as increasing survivors' safety and comfort by providing other plausible reasons for them to be away from home, really facilitated help seeking within our systematic review. And then furthermore, just having resources available in healthcare settings assisted survivors access to resources, since they're better able to access a healthcare clinic than a domestic violence agency. And so that healthcare clinic is some place that a person routinely goes to and can go to for a variety of reasons. And so one of the major takeaways from our article was having services located just in areas that's easier for survivors to access. And so Christina, what do you think this means for the practice community?
So in terms of accessibility, it's really important that, from experience, that agencies have some kind of 24-hour hotline, or, are able to refer to a hotline that is 24 hours. That way, clients that are seeking services, or maybe just have questions on what to do, they are able to speak to somebody at whatever time of the day. I mean, we all know that abuse doesn't happen at 5 o'clock on a Saturday or on a Sunday, that it's happening at every single day and at all different times. And also, this kind of ensures a little bit more of safety if it's 24 hours that a client maybe has access to if her partner's at work, or if her partner works overnight and is home all day. Another big part is, like you said, the offering language services. Like stated within the quote, a lot of people who do not speak English or speak Spanish or, a different language, it will stop them or does hinder them from moving forward in their process, because they're not able to express their emotions, their feelings, or their situation comfortable because they're unable to speak English. Another thing of that is just, the fear of being deported, which is why a lot of, minorities tend to not report abuse that's taking place to the police. And so having an outside agency that's maybe not affiliated with law enforcement, also brings in that comfortability, as well as, offering the different language services. And also, as far as, services and easy to reach locations, is that to really emphasize that is that a lot of people really don't know the rates of IPV and do not realize that how frequent it is and how much it is happening. And so a big part of that is just really being, present in the community, engaging in that community outreach, different social media platforms to really put the name of the agency or yourself out there. And also, as a provider, really engaging and promoting access to community services. That's how you're really going to ensure that you are assisting clients as being knowledgeable in the different services that are out in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think accessibility became even more critical, especially during this pandemic that we've all been experiencing with regards to technology and the inability of survivors to even know if agencies were open. I've seen that have articles coming out about that in the literature recently. Do you have any thoughts about how agencies can become more accessible now under this pandemic?
And I think with COVID-19, as you said, I think everybody across the nation has seen a skyrocketed numbers of IPV cases just because, clients have been so limited. And so I think for future progress is that, providers come together with their agencies and really figure out, okay, should another pandemic happen, or should this pandemic continue to worsen like it did, in 2020, what are the options that we're going to be able to do for these clients? Are these grants that maybe we need to write to have funds for, as far as, maybe putting clients in hotels, or, creating bigger shelter space, whatever it may be, it really needs to be tailored, because it's possible that it could happen again. And so to avoid numbers going up, how can we keep these individuals safe? And too, that just goes back to the 24-hour hotline. Should a client need a safety plan, or should they need, an easier way to escape their situation, they're going to have access to that daily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's where the research community can come in and assist even further, is understanding what accessibility looks like whenever in-person services are not possible. And so using things like Zoom and other forms of technology in order for survivors to access providers, those are things that we need to keep having conversations about and consider, what's going to be the efficacy of those tools moving forward. Yeah. So the next theme, in addition to accessibility, survivors' desire to protect their children as well as prevent future violence was a facilitating factor in a participant's decision to seek help for their experiences of IPV. And so specifically, survivors felt more interested in interacting with IPV services when their aim was to protect their children and prevent future violence. And so, for example, this quote that we found in one of the articles says, "My daughter," she said, "Mommy, why do you let him hurt you? Mommy, Mommy, you are a good mommy. You didn't do anything bad. Why is Daddy punishing you?" I thought, God, she's only 6 and she already knows. I can't let her grow up and see this. And so this example of a child really encouraging a mother to seek help and trying to provide her the support really facilitated help seeking within these articles. Additionally, survivors didn't want their children to be exposed to future violence, and that led them to make the decision to seek assistance. And so participants who recognized the level of danger that they were in because of their relationship, that aided them in finally deciding to seek help for this relationship. And so, Christina, how do you think this, what do you think these findings, how implications do they have for the practice community?
So when meeting with the client, it really just goes back to that education piece. That's a big question that a lot of clients ask. Well, what about my children? Am I doing them a disservice if I leave and I take away their mom, or I take away their dad? Is that going to further hinder them? That's when it's really important to discuss how the cycle of violence and how that cycle can continue on through their children. Either, they have a daughter, whether she becomes the aggressor or she becomes a victim herself, or for a son, either he becomes an aggressor or, he's a victim. it's always going to carry on with the children because they're starting to view the abuse that's taking place as somewhat as a normal thing and start to develop the idea that that's what love should be. Well, I grew up watching my parents go through this, so it's okay. And so it's okay if I go through it, and then pass it on to their children and so forth and so forth. In terms of, recognizing the level of the danger in the relationship, I think the biggest discussion is, when you meet with the client and you're implementing the danger system, which is a tool that's used to measure the level of risk in relationships, is, asking that question, have you ever been strangled before? Has your partner ever placed their hands around your neck, or have they ever choked you? And just going into the facts about strangulation and how, a partner that's been strangled, or a victim or a client that's been strangled by an intimate partner is several times more likely to fall victim of a homicide. And, what are the signs and symptoms and the long-term effects that can come from strangulation as well.
Mm-hmm. So really leveraging kind of what's known about the long-term effects of IPV, known from the research community, the research that's out there, to really educate that survivor and help her see kind of the extent and the level of danger that she's at. I think the danger assessment is a great tool, and it's been validated within the research community over and over as a really good assessment to help survivors really recognize that level of danger, and providers as well.
Yeah, and I really like too with the danger assessment is that it focuses on both the physical and the emotional part of the abuse that's taking place, so that it also gives that validation of whether, they've never physically been touched, but hey, the threats and the warning signs and them belittling you are all signs and symptoms of you being in an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. All right. And then the final theme that we noted as far as facilitating factors for help seeking were kind of three main categories. And so first, participants discussed how their knowledge of available resources and the services that are available for IPV encouraged them to seek help simply because they knew that help was out there. And so having an awareness of services and agencies available and an understanding of the process of those services gave survivors the confidence that they needed to ultimately seek help. Additionally, policy factors such as survivors who had knowledge of their rights as well as the penalties for IPV, that helped them have the confidence to seek help from legal services. And then for those who were maybe unaware of their rights or the punishments that were available, they desired to seek help and get information from legal services to see if what had happened to them was actually prosecutable. And then finally, participants within the included articles just sought help due to personal factors. And so they commented that they sought help to improve kind of their overall sense of well-being and their mental health because they were struggling due to the experiences of abuse that they had had. And so they sought help hoping to gain encouragement and support that would ultimately help them heal from their experiences of abuse and improve their overall health. So Christina, how do you think the practice community can utilize these findings?
Well, first, to really touch on, pandemic policies and procedures, I think that going forward, as stated before, that it is very important that us as service providers and within different agencies is that we really need to figure out what our other options are going to be. I mean, we've seen with the COVID-19 that it's just really hindered clients from being able to access services. And so figuring out how we can tailor those needs to further decrease the number of IPV, the rates from increasing, and rather trying to keep them in decreasing and still ensuring that they're safe. I really do want to touch highly on that is very important for future. And then two, I guess, really on the policy factors is that acknowledging when a client comes in that everything that's discussed is confidential, that, a big thing is they come in and they ask the question of, will my partner find out? Are they going to know that I was here? Ensuring the client that everything that is discussed, their partner will not be notified, and that everything that's discussed will stay private. And I think too, to touch on that is just really going over as far as what a mandated reporter is. and ensuring that, by law, these are the things that we do have to report. That all goes into, into confidentiality and to their rights to privacy. Another thing with that is that with personal factors is that, really going over with a client what their rights are and what their options are within their situation, really respecting their autonomy, giving them the choice to make the decision as, is this what's right for me and my family, or, what should we do next? Giving her that choice really will help to create that trust, so that when the client is ready, they are going to come back and want to proceed with, either leaving the relationship or further seeking services. Another big part of that is just knowing as a provider, about other community resources, as well as having knowledge within the criminal justice system. A lot of clients come in and they ask, well, if I report the abuse, what is this going to look like? What's going to happen? Is this something that's going to be over within a couple of months? Is this something that's going to take a year? Explaining what the difference is in a protective order or a restraining order. Any little knowledge about criminal justice is going to really go a long way, because it's further going to help the client or assist the client in making their decision, and whether or not they want to proceed with legal action. I think that those are all very, very, very important. And then as far as just, going back to just educating the client, and doing, the safety planning, whether the client leaves with anything, the most important thing is that they feel validated, empowered, and that they now know they have the education part of what's going on within their relationship, and they are able to see the red flags. And they do have the tools on what they need to do in order to stay safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I keep hearing over and over just knowledge and education and how critical that is as a provider. And I think that was kind of the underlying theme that we found within our paper, was just having knowledge of the services that were available, and then having just the ability to access those services, and then as well as the education that providers can have, just educating survivors on their rights, educating survivors on the services available to them within their communities is so critical. Kristen.
Yes, so just to recap, we have talked about various facilitators of help seeking. And so these have been divided out into these main takeaways. And that is that it's really important that we have provider competence that are related to IPV among diverse groups. Accessibility to services through technology and multilingual services, as well as through physical locations accessed by individuals with limited transportation. The role that informal support plays in the process of formal help seeking, as well as formal support needing to be necessary to keep survivors engaged. So engaging in that, the provider competence that we had shared about, to be able, in the cultural humility, to be able to keep survivors engaged. And then also we found that a survivor's desire to improve their physical and mental well-being was a very important factor in seeking help. And policy factors were also important, related to when survivors are aware of their rights, and for the penalties for IPV, they were more likely to seek help, knowing that information. And then also just having that general information about the knowledge about IPV, about services that are available, and having the desire to seek those services were a major facilitator of help seeking. And so just in conclusion, we're really grateful for this opportunity to share our work with other researchers and practitioners, and to learn from practitioners as well, because I think it's very critical that we have practice-informed research and research-informed practice. And it's through this partnership that we're able to best serve clients, especially in regards to the context of COVID, since we are living in these unprecedented times. related to COVID and how it is impacting all of us. I did also want to circle back and touch briefly on the element of tailored services and having cultural humility and provider competence related to other cultures. If I understand correctly, the next month there'll be a webinar that looks at culturally responsive intervention that may be of interest to the audience if they would like to know more about this topic. And so I wanted to share that information. But again, we're so grateful to have had this conversation and be able to share it with our audience. So with that, thank you very much. And we'll now be open for questions. And I'm going to put our contact information on the screen briefly before Susan takes over again.
Great, we'll leave that up during the question time. And folks, remember, you can enter your questions right there in the question tab, and I will be sharing them with the presenters. But the first question is, did anything surprise you about the facilitators and the related research as you did this work?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure if anything in particular stood out as a surprise to me in terms of facilitators. Having been in the field and the practice setting beforehand, I felt like nothing particularly surprised me, but I'd be interested in hearing what the other panelists, if there's anything that surprised them.
I was grateful to find within the literature articles that focus specifically on different communities' experiences with intimate partner violence and how we can encourage help seeking among different unique communities. And so I was very encouraged that the research community is interested in kind of understanding, like we said earlier, the unique experiences of IPV among different individuals with different kind of intersecting identities. And so I think going forward that, researchers need to continue those conversations because, as we've stated in this webinar, everybody's experience of IPV is unique and everybody's kind of living within a different environment, living with different intersections. And so continuing to kind of understand how we can be open to a variety of people within the community, be open and have services that are tailored to meet the needs of even, the minorities within our community is so important. And so I was grateful. I was surprised, I guess, to find that there was a lot of articles that focus particularly on that. I think we need to keep it up.
All right, a somewhat related question. This is for the researchers. For the 7 facilitators, is there one facilitator where you think the research is the strongest? Support, accessibility, protection?
I think the research is really strong on accessibility. I think there's research out there that really looks at how survivors access services and the importance of making services that are accessible. I also think the research on support is also very well documented. Just support from both informal networks, friends, family, children, also, but just kind of those minor formal support networks, like we said, employers, kind of the next level up within the survivor's community, as well as support once a survivor does seek help from formal services. I think those two are probably most documented from my perspective, and how critical those are in terms of being necessary for survivors to ultimately seek help. Kristen, do you have any thoughts?
No, I would agree. I think those are the areas that are most strong. And as you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, how we're starting to get more research that is looking at individual groups and what are facilitators among those particular groups. But also, I do want to note that there are some areas that are lacking in terms of populations that are not being included in the research, and such as Native populations. We're not seeing as much research out there about survivors who are from East Asian, South Asian, and Middle Eastern communities, and immigrants from those areas. And so looking at facilitators specifically among those groups is an area that there's a need for future research.
And that brings me to my question for Christina. Christina, where, now that you have looked at this research, where would you like to see more research or more evidence about these facilitators and how they operate? Is there one area that you think that stood out to you that you thought, I wish we knew a little more about this?
I have always really been interested in as far as looking at the numbers of minorities and the reporting of domestic violence. I think, like I said earlier, is that we really see a decline in those that speak a different language, whether it's, Spanish or it's Vietnamese. I would really like to see across the board, what are the rates of the IPV rates and the rates of the reporting and how often people report, and of those that do report, how many seek services. But because, of that fear of being deported, it's, that's really what is the hindering factor as to why they don't seek assistance and they do stay within the relationship.
We had another question. You all focused on IPV, intimate partner violence. Do you see that as a different definition than domestic violence or domestic abuse? Broader, narrower, equivalent?
I would say probably a little more broad in terms of domestic violence in general, would refer more towards people that may be living together or in a kind of a live-in or married situation. So intimate partner violence, I think, expands that definition, includes people who may be in dating relationships, may not be married or in long-term relationships. So I feel like it broadens it a little bit more, and it allows for different types of relationships in terms of same sex, different sex. I feel like that kind of opens it up a little bit more, which is kind of why we prefer that particular term in some cases. But I know in some communities that doesn't make sense. If there's a community that relationships are more focused around marriage, then often you'll see domestic violence or spousal abuse being more used rather than that broader term.
We had a question in terms of accessibility. Did the research generally recommend specific locations to reach or serve survivors?
I think within the articles, they focused on accessibility at specific locations. And so I don't know if they particularly recommended one location more than the other. We did note more frequently that articles recruited participants from healthcare settings. And so maybe that's kind of a more recommended. I think healthcare settings are just such a good place because like I said earlier, you can go to healthcare clinic for a variety of reasons. And so even a routine checkup, having providers ask, just do a quick screening, like, is anybody hurting you, is so critical. And so as far as accessibility for kind of being a first point of contact for getting help, the articles did note healthcare settings more frequently. So maybe that would be kind of a more important location.
Earlier, you all mentioned the usefulness of danger assessment tools. Can you talk a little bit more about how someone can find a validated danger assessment tool, or more information about that?
Yeah.
You can actually look up the danger assessment within Google, and then search, danger assessment survivor tool, and it will. That's probably the first thing pops up. Is it's danger assessment, and then above it says Dr. Campbell, and so right there is where you can access it. And actually, within the website, they do have different danger assessments that are maybe catered towards those that are in same-sex relationships, also as well as, different racial cultures. They kind of cater it to what is more prevalent within those different populations.
And you can also look at, in terms of finding out validated scales for danger assessment, looking at if you have access to any kind of academic institutions, looking in there, or looking in Google Scholar for articles that have been validated with certain populations. Those are out there, but I'm sure that what Christina mentioned, those particular instruments have been validated as well. But if you're looking for specific articles, you can look for validation articles on danger assessments and kind of see what's been validated and shown to be reliable.
And often there are challenges for providers accessing academic materials just because a lot of them are not open access or open source. And so as researchers, if you were to email me just to get a copy of my paper, that would be totally fine. And so I would say if there's an article that you find on Google Scholar, but you're not able to access it, don't pay the $40, just email the author. And a lot of times they will send it to you via email with no problem. And so if you find, on Google Scholar that there's a measurement, a danger tool that you want more information about, feel free to email that author. And if they don't get back to you, a lot of times a faculty at universities will be able to access it, or local libraries will be able to access it via interlibrary loans. So we are striving to make those materials more accessible, which is why these partnerships are so critical between providers and researchers, because we publish in academic journals and that's often challenging for providers to access. So if there's something you want, feel free to ask us and we're always happy to send it. And I'm speaking on behalf of all researchers right now, but I feel like my colleagues.
I know for me personally, if you're not able to access it and there's something you really want, please email me and I'm happy to send it to you. I can locate it and send it to you. It's really important that practitioners have access to these materials. And so I'm more than happy to send you any kind of materials or any studies that you may have trouble accessing.
That's great. And the CVR librarian reminded me that the danger assessment tool is in the screening and assessment tools collection on the CVR website.
Perfect.
So we've had a couple of other questions come in. Does the different services, or do the different services talk to each other to identify victims that may jump from one service to another? Did the research talk about that?
I'm not sure that it particularly did talk about communication within services. You will see the family justice type models where there are a lot of organizations that are linked together in one location so that survivors can access them and that they can potentially communicate better. But I don't believe that we had any family justice center models specifically in our research, and that would be something interesting to learn a little bit more about and see if there is more research about that communication between that kind of setting.
I know there are a few communities that are working on electronic systems that allow them to share and communicate with one another with the client's permission, with different privacy restrictions depending on the type of provider. Another sort of comment and question. I thought the segment about having knowledge of the criminal justice system as you are working with victims was extremely important and interesting. As a current MSW student, how would you suggest we gain this additional knowledge within the field of social work? Are there resources or tips you can suggest as we expand our studies?
Some tips that I would really suggest is just whatever, state or county, just really emphasizing your resources that you have on hand or that you're able to look into as far as what are state policies, how does that specific county or state, what are their legislation laws as far as domestic violence or intimate partner violence, what does the court system really look like? And with those things you can really look into, okay, by implementing in Google Scholar, just to kind of see what different authors or resources there are available that really go into great detail as far as what the state of Texas or what the state of California's new protocol is on the criminal justice process and trying to prosecute those who have fallen victim to an abusive partner. What are the typical time links that it does take as far as prosecuting somebody that maybe has received charges for abusing another person, and two, as far as what are the charges as far as should a person strangle another person, is that seen as a felony in the state of California? What are the different charges classified as? Are they misdemeanors or are they felonies? That in itself is a big step as far as kind of gaining knowledge in the criminal justice system, because you'll be able to explain your clients, well, should you continue with, within the criminal justice system, this is probably what the end result will be, and this is the consequence that will follow behind that.
And also, too, a lot of the websites of the criminal justice system, district attorney's office within your local area, they'll have a victim advocacy side. And so a lot of times on those websites are a lot of that information kind of compiled very succinctly, and it's meant for victims who are interested in seeking prosecution to kind of get an understanding of what the process might look like or what their individual rights are. So just checking out those websites, you might be able to find more about your specific area. And then you could also reach out to a lot of district attorney's office have victim advocates that you could reach out and ask more specific questions to, but they've compiled that information on websites so that survivors who are interested in seeking help can have that kind of readily available to them. That's another source.
That's great. And I would also mention that the National Network to End Domestic Violence, nnedv.org, does have the Women's Law Project where you can look up laws. But again, seeing the laws in print and then talking to someone in your area who knows how things are really operating in practice, you kind of need both of those. All right, well, it looks like we have reached the end of our questions and about the end of our hour, so things were perfectly timed. This has been really fascinating. I want to thank the three of you for this. Really informative and great to bring us all up to speed on where the research is in this area. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I think I'll just echo what Kristen says, and that we're so grateful for these conversations, because now more than ever, it's so important for practitioners and researchers to come together to just share knowledge and education from our different spheres of knowledge and education. And so I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to be able to come together and share kind of an example of what it could look like. Because moving forward, you know, especially under the pandemic, it's even more critical for us to figure out how to work together to be able to assist survivors in our communities. So thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm going to close us out. Folks, please do take that feedback survey that you're going to get as soon as you leave the webinar. Please, for our upcoming events, please do check the calendar on the CVR website. And for those of you who attended today's webinar, you'll be receiving a follow-up email that will give you information about the next session. So with that, goodbye. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.